Welcome to part 2 of my truth and my story and my journey through the corruption of the Nevada legal system. For those who are just tuning in, I have been put through a 4-year divorce over a marriage that lasts 60 days to conceal mortgage fraud. And they've done this through judicial corruption of the police department, Secretary of State, the Attorney General's office, the county recorder's office. And I've reported this to several places. And for the last year have been forced to defend myself in civil court when these are crimes that have been committed against me and should be litigated in criminal court. But because of the manipulation of our government and our police department and the laws that are in place, they are able to help everybody evade prosecution without any checks and balances. And even though we have them in place with the Constitution, nobody enforces them. So when you have a judicial system that monitors itself and it is its own checks and balances, you get corruption. And the corruption hurts families. It destroys businesses. It destroys our communities. And I'm hoping that me opening up and telling my story about what's happened to me changes something and leaves a record out there for somebody else who might be able to fight a system that's bigger than one person. So I think where I left off last time, I was talking about when I first found out in June of 2018 that I wasn't on the title of the home and that he had stolen a lot of money from me and basically stole everything that I had left of what my son raised and put it into this house, which was now solely in his name. So at first he was very apologetic and he said he didn't know I wasn't on the title and he wasn't trying to hurt me. And, I knew that wasn't true because I did go to real estate school. I didn't finish. It was during the time Aiden was sick. And I knew a little bit about the process. So I knew there was no way he could have bought this house and not put me on the title because I never allowed it. So when they closed, I thought they simply closed without me. I thought it was on the title and they just took away my right to look over the documents and decide. So at that point, I didn't know what to do. I just got married and he's saying that he was on board with the whole process and this was the best choice for us. And, it was so much trauma at that time. And the decision to even get married 2 weeks after my son passed should have been a very clear sign to everybody around me that I was not okay. And then all my hair fell out. My body was covered in hives. I was in a position where I was completely vulnerable. And this one person thought that was the best time to come in and try to steal as much as he could. And he was able to do it with the help of the realtor. So when I found out all of this transpired, I told him to leave the house. And that's the recording everybody's heard. And from that point on, he left the house. He went to his mom's house where his mom helped him and let him stay there, knowing what he had done. And, any mother is going to support their kid. I understand that. But to support your son knowing that he committed fraud at the level that he did, and was putting an innocent mother through this. As a mother, I would have stood up and said something. I would have did something. I wouldn't have just let him move back in. And so he moved back to his mom's house. When he moved back to his mom's house, he took everything in the savings account. He took the car that was purchased during the marriage. He took the furniture that was purchased during the marriage. And he took everything. And he left. And he went back to his mom's and he then called Linda Naw. When he called Linda Naw told him not to worry about it, that she would get him a lawyer, which she did, and she retained him Shumway Van. And from there, they began litigating a divorce. And I then was forced to go get a lawyer as well. So I went and found a lawyer. I found Chris Tillman. I went down to his office in tears, and I told him what had happened. That I was supposed to be on this house, that I was not on this house. I gave him the recordings of Bobby admitting that he didn't know I wasn't on the house. I gave him text messages of him saying I didn't come to the title company, the same ones that I've uploaded over and over again. And at that time, he looks at this one document, the letter of agreement, and he says, you know, we can't annul this because your wording in the letter of agreement says in the event of divorce. So even though I gave him very clear evidence of Bobby Ante being part of the fraud, he then immediately misled me by saying it had to be litigated as a divorce. And then began, once I retained him, began conspiring with Shumway Van to put me through the most difficult divorce possible so that I would settle and take whatever money they would give me and move on before I knew anything about any of the fraud. Well, at this point, I had already went to the police department and they wouldn't help me. I then got a lawyer and he immediately started misleading me. And I was furious because I knew Linda Na Purdue, the only person I had dealt with. I made it very clear to her that we were both supposed to be on the title, which she agreed to in writing. And I've uploaded all that and showed that to the police department at the time. But their agenda was never to help me or give me justice. It was always to try to conceal this. So in the beginning, I'm just saying it's fraud. I don't know anything about mortgage fraud. I don't know anything about a quitclaim deed because I didn't sign one. So I have no idea any of this exists. So I filed my first complaint with GALVAR. GALVAR is the ethics board for the real estate agent. So I file my complaint. I show them all these text messages. I give them the audio recording of Bobby admitting everything, and I wait. Weeks and weeks go by, and I don't hear anything from GALVAR. So I then again file another complaint with Business and Industry, the mortgage division, and I tell them what happened. And I give him the tapes. And I'm like, okay, well, this realtor has to lose her license for this because you can't tell somebody one thing to get them to do something and then not do it. That's misstatements. So I'm telling the GALVAR and Business Industry all this information. And the Daryl McCloskey at the Business Industry completely ignores me and tells me, you weren't part of the transaction, so you can't file on a complaint, and tries to close it. GALVAR then tells me, nobody did anything wrong, so we're going to close this complaint out. And I'm like, I appeal both decisions. I'm like, this is insane. This was all my money. He had, none of this money was his. So how can he put this house in his name without my knowledge and without me saying this was okay? So when I file appeal, the appeal at Business and Industry with Daryl McCloskey, he completely ignores me and he just stops answering my emails. So he doesn't even go through with an appeal. And then I go back to GALVAR with Ingrid Trujillo, and she then files the appeal and gives me respondent docs. The respondent docs were provided by Shumway Van, Linda Na, and Bobby Ante. So when I get the respondent docs, this is the first time I hear Bobby's story change. And in his story now he says, Lindsay knew about all of this. She knew that she wasn't going to be on the title. She agreed to all of this. She can't just change her mind now, and she needs to get help because she lost her son, and she's attacking St. Jude. She's attacking Make-A-Wish. Now she's attacking us. And this was in this statement. And I'm reading this statement like, are you kidding me? Then Linda Na writes her statement, and Linda Na writes the same thing. We told her the whole time, and she was on board with this. She can't get mad at us because she entered a failed marriage, and basically blows the whole situation off. And also in these respondent docs, they provide a quitclaim deed. And they say she signed the quitclaim deed. In both of their statements, they say this. And I'm like, this is insane. There's no way. I didn't sign a quitclaim deed. I would never sign a quitclaim deed. This makes no sense. So I then tell Ingrid at GALVAR, that's not that's not my signature. I didn't sign that. And I continued to examine these respondent docs. And I then noticed that the notary that said I signed it was Nikki Secaucus Bott. And I also noticed that Nikki Secaucus Bott was also the escrow agent at the title company that collected commission on the closing of the sale. So in June of 2018, Galvar, Ingrid Trujillo, Daryl McCloskey, Las Vegas Police Department all knew about the notary fraud and mortgage fraud. And so did my counsel, Chris Tillman. And nobody did anything. They continued to conspire together to make this divorce as hard for me as possible so that I would just simply settle. And once I settled and signed off on it, it wouldn't matter what I found out later. I already signed away on everything. But I refused to let Bobby Ante get away with anything that my son raised for how he had just treated me for the 6 months, for defrauding me, for marrying me for the purpose to just steal, not because he cared about me or my son or any of the work that I did, and then had the audacity to then abuse me verbally, mentally, emotionally for 6 months to cover up what he had done at the closing of this house. So now I have filed complaints with everybody, and they're all ignoring these complaints. I even tell her the escrow agent can't be the notary. That's against the law. She then tells me it's nothing wrong with it. Sometimes they have dual roles. So I then fire my first counsel, and I tell him, it's been 6 months and you've done absolutely nothing. You've changed my first court date for the trial, which was supposed to only be a few months after I filed for divorce. But he kept telling me he wasn't ready, he needed time to prepare, and they kept extending it. So now I'm stuck in this house, and I'm solely paying for the house by myself, a house I never wanted. And I'm trying to run my foundation and trying to get justice for what these people have done to me. And if you look back into my Facebook and Instagram posts, you can see in 2018, I was checking in at the police department over and over again. I was checking in at Galvar. I was checking in at all these places to leave a record of what I was doing. And when I had an attorney, Chris Tillman, at the time, and I was filing these police reports and they weren't helping me, and I was going to Secretary of State and to the mortgage divisions and they weren't helping me, he should have advocated for me. But because he chose to conspire with Shumway Van and Grayson Moulton and Garrett Chase, nobody cared about me. It was all just ignore her and hopefully she will run out of resources and she'll have to settle. So I then let that attorney go and I filed into the case myself. And this was December of 2018. And I tell the judge, and my first judge was Kathy Hardcastle. And when we first went in, she says, Bobby, you're not getting anything for being married to a woman for 6 months. Because by the time I filed, it was 6 months now. And she said, and how could you spend $98,000 in a month and you make $30,000 a year? So I knew that this judge was honest. There was going to be no problems. And at that point, I was then ordered to stay in the house. But when this judge told him that was a different judge. It was Kathy Hardcastle. After that hearing, Bobby and his counsel then paid the clerk to switch my case to Raina Hughes. And Kathy Hardcastle said nothing. And Raina Hughes took over the case. So when I filed for legal separation and I submitted all this evidence of the forgery, of the notary fraud from the respondent docs that were given to me from Bobby Ante, Linda Na, and Shumway Van into the legal separation, she refused to hear anything. And then I also filed it into the divorce for separate maintenance. And when I went into court, when she heard it, she said she was hearing nothing about anything else and she would only decide on possession of the house. So she then gave me full possession of the house and ordered me to live in it while they litigated the divorce. She ordered me to pay all the bills in the house, present and previous. She ordered him to maintain my medical insurance while we litigated the divorce. And she basically, he was given, all ties were taken away from the house. He didn't have any responsibility, and he was able to go back to his mom's house, and I solely had to pay for the whole house. And at the time, I thought that was a win because, you know, at least now I could protect the money. I could protect the money that was put into the house. And if I was making the mortgage payments into the house, when we got to the divorce hearing, she would hear all of this and it would be simple. So at that point, the attorney, Chris Tillman, isn't even on my legal separation case. He's on the divorce case. So when I'm going in there and I'm trying to tell her about the notary fraud and the mortgage fraud, she refuses to hear anything and then makes me wait 45 minutes for Chris Tillman to get there. So then when Chris Tillman gets there, he basically tells her, oh, she just wanted her name back. She didn't know what she was doing. Let's consolidate these cases and we'll handle everything at trial. So she consolidates the cases and everybody walks out and I'm like, what just happened? And he's like, don't worry, we'll address all this stuff at trial. And I'm telling my lawyer, he's in contempt. He's not maintaining my medical insurance. He's not providing me with any bills on the house. I'm not on the homeowner's insurance. I'm still have no access to the house. And he tells me not to worry, we'll handle it all at trial. So at that point, I was done with Chris Tillman. I fired him twice. So when I was done with Chris Tillman, I then got a summons. Once I found out about the fraud and forgery, I got a summons from Shumway Van that was now suing me from Linda Na. So Linda Na, not only did this lady knowingly give everything that belonged to me and my son and put it in this man's name, she then got him a lawyer to help him conspire to cover up the fraud they committed, and then had the audacity to go file a defamation lawsuit against me because I said that she forged my name. And if you look at the laws of forgery of Nevada, anybody who knowingly conceals forgery is guilty of forgery. So there was never any defamation. But this was just another piece of their plan to get me to have to go get a civil attorney to defend me in this defamation case. So at that point, I file a complaint with the state bar and I tell them Chris Tillman has now had my case for months. He's done absolutely nothing. They committed fraud and forgery. And I submit all this evidence to state bar and I tell them Linda Na and Bobby Ante are both using Shumway Van law firm. They're both using Garrett Chase and Grayson Moulton and Michael Van. That's a conflict of interest. So if you look up Nevada rules of professional procedure or whatever it is, rule 1.8, they can't represent the same clients over the same matters. But still today they are. And they're able to continue to harass me, stalk me through endless litigation because of the corruption in the Nevada court systems. So at this point, I'm telling the state bar what's happening. And I then retain Jennings and Fulton. So Jennings and Fulton law firm, I found them. I looked up real estate law firm so that I would have somebody that would know what to do to get justice against this realtor. And from there, I go to his office and I tell Adam Fulton, they forged my name. The notary notarized the document herself. Here's all the evidence that I submitted in my legal separation and separate maintenance case. And he then goes into, oh, we'll go to bat for you. We'll help you out. And they happen to be Mormon. So I grew up Mormon. So this was the bond that I immediately had with him, not knowing what I know now. So I hire Adam Fulton and he helps me with only the Linda Na case. So from there, I'm telling them, you know, Chris Tillman, he didn't help me. It's been months through this divorce. They're using the same law firm. How can they stall this out so much? Because every time I would call Shumway Van about the divorce, they would ignore me. And they would say, oh, have your counsel call. So when I fired my counsel, I would then call myself and they would ignore me. So when then my counsel would call, my counsel would say, oh, they don't answer the phone for us either. So now the state bar knew that Shumway Van was committing legal malpractice. Chris Tillman knew they were committing legal malpractice. And so did Jennings and Fulton. And nobody stopped it. It all continued. So at that point, I reported the notary to the Secretary of State. And I said, look, she can't be the escrow agent. She can't be the notary. So Nikki Secaucus-Bott committed fraud. And the Secretary of State takes the complaint. And I'm dealing with a lady named Elena. And they wait weeks and months to respond. And in the meantime, Nikki Secaucus-Bott is getting all over social media telling everybody that I signed it, that I came in there, she was there, and to stop slandering her before she calls the police on me. So the Secretary of State, I reach back out to him and I say, hey, why is nobody doing anything? Because this is clear evidence. And I have now a new set of attorneys who are now watching me report stuff to the Secretary of State, to the police department, and advocating not at all for me, letting me do everything myself. So the Secretary of State finally responds to the complaint and says, Nikki Secaucus-Bott didn't turn in her journal. So she didn't have my signature. I gave him evidence that it was impossible. My ID had been surrendered to Nevada DMV, so there's no way I couldn't even signed it. And they then close it out, charge her a $250 fine, and tell me that's all they're going to do. But the simple fact that they opened up an investigation and did one on Nikki Secaucus-Bott as the notary, but then had documents from the loan closing that she was the escrow agent, was clear evidence to the Secretary of State of the fraud and forgery. Instead of Lenora Mueller from the Secretary of State reporting this to the district attorney and the attorney general like she's supposed to in the law, she conceals it and allows everybody to continue litigation over community property of this house. So my attorneys said nothing. They did nothing and continued to say it is community property. And I continued to fight my attorneys, telling them you can't commit fraud and then obtain property. But I didn't know the law at the time. I'm just telling them from a moral standpoint, there's no way. So they keep trying to convince me, just settle the divorce and take the money from the house. And at the time, in the beginning, there was no equity. It was upside down. So all of this splitting equity that they're trying to do now, why would he get half of anything that he committed fraud to obtain and then never lived in the home to even build this over the last 3 years for the equity? But we'll get to the part of why the Nevada judicial system has given him everything. And so now I've reported this to everybody. Jennings and Fulton have taken over the defamation case. And instead of filing a motion to dismiss it because it was all bullshit and they had plenty of evidence, they begin litigating it and then charged me a $5,000 retainer for that case. And then also take over the divorce case. Jennings and Fulton, Adam Fulton, Jared Jennings, and Logan Wilson never had a retainer for the divorce case. They then waited a year to file any claims against the title company. So for this year that I have Jennings and Fulton now, even though they have clear evidence of what happened the moment I sat down in their office, they then try to build a case for Linda Naw. So every time I come into the office, I'm thinking we're going to do discovery or something that's going to, help me in this case. They start asking me questions about, well, did you say Linda Naw signed your name? Did you? But none of this has anything to do with my divorce. So it goes on like this for 2 years. And during the 2 years, I'm not on the house still, but I'm forced to pay it. I'm not on any of the utilities, but I'm forced to pay them. So he's letting my lights get turned off, my water get turned off. I get in a car accident, and this was like around October of 2019, I think. And I got in the car accident, but then there was a robbery of my car at my work. And had I been on the homeowner's insurance, had I been that I've been telling my attorneys for a year, everything in my car would have been covered. But because my attorneys never advocated for me at all, and I was never put on it, I took a complete loss in that car robbery. So at that time, my attorneys are like, you need to take them videos down. And at the time, I'm like, no, I'm not afraid to be honest about everything that's happening here. And if Bobby and Linda don't like me talking about them, well, then they need to admit to what they've done and give me justice. So we go on for about 2 years of back and forth of litigation. And finally, I'm supposed to go to trial February of 2020. So they're telling me this whole time, they're preparing for trial. And the trial comes up and I'm just ecstatic. Like, it's been 2 years I've been waiting for this day to get justice, to move on with my life, to be able to get married again or have kids. And, I was just ecstatic. And I go to my lawyer's office the night before and they have me preparing for the trial. So at the trial, before the trial, they have a pre-trial, memorandum or whatever, and they're going over this with me. And it has all my evidence in it. It has the evidence I submitted 2 years ago. It has all the claims that I'm making. They're also representing me in 2 other cases, so they have all the evidence. And I'm thinking, I'm going in here with the priesthood. I'm going in here with these lawyers that are honest, that, have gone through 2 years of, meetings, and, I'm working nights to pay them to make sure that I don't get behind. And I finally get to this trial and they tell me for this trial, I'm going to have to pay $18,000 for 2 days of trial. So I've already paid them $16,000 over the last 2 years to prepare for this trial. And then at the trial, they want another $18,000. And I'm like, whatever. If it gives me justice, take it out of whatever money's going to come from the house and just give me justice, because that's all I've ever wanted. So when they realized they couldn't put so much stress on me that I was going to settle prior to ever seeing a courthouse, they then went to trial over this deed that wasn't valid for 2 days. So I'm going to stop here with part 2, and I will continue with part 3, where I will tell you about the entire trial. And I do realize that with these videos, this is a hard story for me to tell. I do suffer from PTSD, from anxiety, from trauma, but I feel like it's important for me to tell the story. And it's important for me to do the best that I can to explain everything that's happened and how they were able to do this. Because if it's this easy for them to hurt somebody who is innocent, who gives back to the community, and who should have never had to go through a day of this, how easy is it for them to hurt everybody else and people who don't have a platform and don't have a voice? And that's what I'm hoping, that me sharing this story and the corruption that I've gone through the judicial system, it changes something. And there's some lawyer out there who is not afraid of these people and is not afraid to expose the corruption of lawyers and judges in our judicial system, because we'll never get to a better place in our community until we have reform, until we have change. Because if they're doing it this blatantly wide in the open as what they've done to me, then they'll do this to anybody at any time. So please share my video and tune in for part 3, where I will go over what happened at the trial.